আসসালামু আলাইকুম, সবাই কেমন আছেন? চলে আসলাম আরও একটা টিউটোরিয়াল নিয়ে। আজকের টিউটোরিয়ালের বিষয় হচ্ছে ইন্ট্রোডাকশন টু লিটারেরি ক্রিটিসিজম। এই সাবজেক্টে প্রিভিয়াস ইয়ার ব্রিফ কোশ্চেন। তো চলো শুরু করা যাক। যেহেতু এই প্রিভিয়াস কোশ্চেনগুলো বারবার রিপিট হতে থাকে, সো আপনারাও অনেক কেয়ারফুল থাকবেন, কারণ এই কোশ্চেনগুলো পড়তে ভুলবেন না। সো শুরু করতেছি আমরা। What is catharsis? Catharsis is the effect of tragedy to the audience that arouse pity and fear. এই ক্যাথারসিসটা আমরা বিভিন্নভাবে লিখতে পারি, যারা যে গাইড ফলো করেন তারা সেভাবে লিখতে পারেন। What is unity of time? The unity of time demands that the action of a tragedy should remain confined within 24 hours. What is Hamashia? Hamashia means error in judgment or miscalculation as a result of which the tragic hero moves from happiness to misery. What are the constituents of a tragedy? There are three constituent elements in tragedy: plot, character, and thought. How does Sidney prove that poets are not liars? The poet doesn't affirm anything. He says what may be or should be. So the question of lying doesn't arise at all. Who is Sophocles? The second of the three great tragedians is Sophocles, who wrote 90 tragedies in which he represented human psychology under fate with superhuman skill. What is Dr. Johnson's opinion about Shakespeare's drama? According to Dr. Johnson, Shakespeare has neither true tragedy nor true comedy, but a special kind of drama known as tragicomedy. To what school of criticism does Dr. Johnson belong? Dr. Johnson belongs to neoclassical school of criticism with some exceptions. What is the main difference between a poet and a common man? The poet is a man who is gifted with more than usual organic sensibility and is capable of thinking long and applied over any variety of subjects which an ordinary can never do. What is Coleridge's idea of fancy? Fancy is that faculty of human mind which doesn't create anything but arbitrary brings images together, retaining their individual existence to be attractive. What does Aristotle mean by imitation? By imitation, Aristotle means an act of imaginative creation by which the poet, drawing his material from the phenomenal world, makes something new out of it. What, according to Aristotle, is the most element of a tragedy? Plot is the most element of a tragedy according to Aristotle. What, according to Sidney, is the aim of poetry? According to Sidney, to teach and to delight is the aim of poetry. Who is Stephen Gosson? Stephen Gosson কে ছিলেন? Stephen Gosson is the Kantist who attacked poetry in his book The School of Abuse. What is an epic? An epic or a heroic poem is the representation of a heroic action in the most elegant style, in which the mind is inspired with a desire to be worthy. Who coined the expression willing suspension of disbelief? Samuel Taylor Coleridge coined the expression. What is the preface to Shakespeare? The preface to Shakespeare means a book in which Dr. Johnson has given the explanatory remarks about Shakespeare as a dramatist. How does Wordsworth define a poet? According to Wordsworth, a poet is a man of speaking to men, endowed with more lively sensibility, more enthusiasm and tenderness, and possessing a more comprehensible soul. How many stages are there in Wordsworth's poetic process? There are 4 stages in the process of poetic creation. Those are observation, recollection, contemplation and imagination. এই কোশ্চেনটা অনেক গুরুত্বপূর্ণ, সো এটা আপনারা নোট করে রাখতে পারেন স্পেশালি ভাবে। What is meant by the term Veds? The term Veds means a diviner or foreseer or prophet. Why does Dr. Johnson call Shakespeare poet of nature? Shakespeare is called the poet of nature because of his presentation of human life that flows through every man of all the ages of human civilization. What is Stesimon? A Stesimon is a choral song without anapaests or trochees. How does scholars define imagination? Imagination is an act of human mind in which different ages are fused and unified to create something new. What is catharsis? Catharsis is the effect of tragedy to the audience that arouses pity and fear. What does Aristotle mean by imitation? By imitation, Aristotle means an act of imaginary creation by which the poet, drawing his material from the phenomenal world, makes something new out of it. What is Dr. Johnson's opinion about Shakespeare's dramas? According to Dr. Johnson, Shakespeare has neither true tragedy nor true comedy, but a special kind of drama known as tragicomedy. What is Hamashia? Hamashia means error in judgment or miscalculation as a result of which the tragic hero moves from happiness to misery. What are the constituents of a tragedy? Three constituent elements in tragedy are plot, character, and thought. What do you mean by the unity of action? The unity of action demands that the action of a tragedy must be a complete whole. In an action, there may be a number of incidents and events, but together they must constitute one and only one action. What are the major elements of a tragedy? The major elements of a tragedy are plot, character, thought, diction, song and spectacle. কেউ সং দেয়, কেউ আবার মিউজিকও দেয়, সো আপনারা আপনাদের ইচ্ছে মতো দিয়ে দিতে পারেন। How does Sidney prove that poets are not liars? The poet doesn't affirm anything. He says what may be or should be, so the question of lying doesn't arise at all. What is mimesis? The Greek word for imitation is mimesis. Mimesis has an extant meaning. For example, representations. How does scholars define a poem? A poem is that a species of composition which is opposed to the works of science by proposing for its immediate object pleasure, not truth. What is poetic diction? Poetic diction is the personate or the individual style and manner of writing in poetry. What is scholar's idea about fancy? Fancy is that faculty of human mind which doesn't create anything but arbitrarily brings image together, retaining their individual existence to be inattractive. What does Aristotle mean by epic? According to Aristotle, an epic or a heroic poem is the representation of a heroic action in the most elegant style in which the mind is inspired with the desire to be worthy. Who, according to Wordsworth, is a poet? According to Wordsworth, a poet is a man of speaking to men, endowed with more lively sensibility, more enthusiasm and tenderness, and possessing a more comprehensible soul. What is the first fault of Shakespeare that Dr. Johnson mentioned in the preface to Shakespeare? The first fault of Shakespeare is that he sacrifices virtue to convenience and is much more careful to please than to instruct. What is the most important part of a tragedy? Plot is the most important part of a tragedy, important element. What is willing suspension of disbelief? Willing suspension of disbelief is a term coined by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. It is a state where the readers are compelled to agree with the writer's statement or to believe his notions. What do you mean by heroic couplet? Heroic couplet is a pair of poetical lines, each of line which have 5 iambic feet and ends with the same sound. What is organic sensibility? It is the capability of a man to receive impressions through the senses. Who was Seneca? Lucius Annius Seneca, are also known as Seneca the Younger, was a Roman Stoic philosopher, statesman, and dramatist. What, according to Aristotle, is the common feature of all art? According to Aristotle, imitation is the common feature of all art. How does Sidney differentiate laughter and delight? According to Sidney, there can be delight without laughter, and it is not the cause of laughter, although laughter may. তো এই ছিল অল অ্যাবাউট লিটারেরি ক্রিটিসিজম এই সাবজেক্টের ব্রিফ কোশ্চেনের আলোচনা। আই হোপ এগুলো আপনারা পড়লে ইনশাল্লাহ পরীক্ষায় কমন পেতে পারেন। এই কোশ্চেনগুলো আপনার জন্য অনেক গুরুত্বপূর্ণ, তাই আমি এটা টিউটোরিয়াল আকারে দিয়ে দিলাম। সো ফ্রেন্ডস, আপনারা যদি আমার চ্যানেলে নতুন হয়ে থাকেন তাহলে অবশ্যই আমার চ্যানেলটি সাবস্ক্রাইব করে পাশে থাকবেন। থ্যাংকস এভরিওয়ান।